Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to our panel. Today, my partner and I, the group code of 164, will gonna present our final year project, which is Good Governance Practices and its relation to public trust at Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh. So, this is the presenter that will present about this topic. I will explain about background of study. As highlighted by Khalid, Alam and Said 2016 and Obiro 2018, good governance practices are very important to increase public trust. According to Muhammad, Ali Kalam, Othman, Omar and Rahman 2017, the integrity of illness remain critical and the level of trust among the public remain the same. Katomi 2017 mentioned that creating a good governance activity is one of the important role as well as part of increasing public trust in government strategy and performance. According to Tun Dr. Mahari 2019, good governance practices need to be applied in political governance, public administration, court and corporate governance. This is because good governance practices are the key concept in order to increase public trust toward the government, based on Nafi and Kamaluddin 2019.
A survey conducted by the Edelman Trust Barometer 2020 found that the level of trust among Malaysians toward the government institution is 58% from 60% in 2019, which is natural, and the level of trust toward the government leaders is 42% considered as distrust. The public will demand and force the government to serve the public needs and serve their interests to uphold democracy and human rights. Hence, the public is expecting that the government is responsible for their roles and responsibilities in achieving the public needs and leads to enhance the public trust. As highlighted by the Beshi and Core 2019, as a democratic country, public involvement in decision-making should be taken into consideration. However, a survey conducted by Transparency International's Global Corruption Barometer (GCB) for Asia country in 2020 shows that 39% of Malaysians believe that the number of corruption has increased in Malaysia. Conceding to the previous statement, Omar ETAL 2017 stated that despite many initiatives taken by the government, but the integrity deficiency is still shackling the civil services and not showing any signs of reduction. According to Hafiz, Azizah, Farah, Wahida and Jamalia 2015, the major challenges of a government are to strengthen the ethics and integrity in order to enhance positive feedback from the public, which is the receiver. The issue of integrity is a significant problem in the Malaysian public sector. Offenders Corruption Statistic 2016 indicate that public and government employees are the highest percentage for corruption cases, which are 41% and 42% respectively. Most importantly, the rising integrity issues and corruption issue by the civil servant can cause the loss of public trust towards the public sector and getting negative feedback from the public, stated by Omar ETAL. According to Core 2020, the Malaysian government do not have a good record on transparency, and he also added that the decreasing of public trust happened because of laws such as Official Secrets Act, the Printing Presses and Publication Act, and the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission Act that offer the chances to hide data and bad news. In referring to a survey conducted by Transparency International Global Corruption (GCB) from Asia 2020, found that Malaysians are the highest rank for the perception of corruption on the other public institution, Parliament, the police and government official, with a rating of 36%, 30% and 28% respectively, according to the Star 2020. The absence of transparency in the public sector will give a chance to perception and level of trust among the public towards the public sector. Rollins 2008 indicates that trust and transparency are interrelated and moderate relationship to satisfaction and corruption, while Park 2011 spotted that the demand for transparency is high priority challenge to citizen trust. Hence, many initiatives and strategies are taken by the government to achieve good governance practices effectively and efficiently in order to curb corruption, fraud and financial mismanagement, according to Hafiz ATL 2015. Besides, the loss of assets had caused concern among the public and on accountability in the public sector, according to Said 2016. The failure of the public sector in practicing accountability and managing the sources will result in a declining level of public trust. According to World Bank 2020, the percentage indicator for voice and accountability in Malaysia is 43.35% out of 100% in 2019. Not only that, Yaakob argued that the existence of audit system is to create a direct relationship and a chain of accountability. Every government wants to prove accountability practices and make them reliable public eyes because it is a fundamental pillar for good governance practices. Salminan and Ecola 2010. Responsiveness was found to be very significant in engaging public trust, according to Zaini, Kopusami and Azizan 2018. Therefore, based on the statement mentioned earlier, this study aims to examine good governance practices and their relation to public trust in one of the local governments in Malaysia. Research question. Based on the problem as discussed above, this research hopes to answer the following research question as below. What is the level of public trust in good governance practices? at Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak? B. Does integrity contribute to the public trust at the Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak? C. Does transparency contribute to the public trust at the Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak? D. Does accountability contribute to the public trust at the Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak? E. Does responsiveness contribute to the public trust at the Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak? And F. Which predictors of good governance practices have the most significant influence on public trust at the Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak? Research objective. Based on the above research question, the objective of this study are as follows. A. To identify the level of public trust in good governance practices at Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak. B. To examine the relationship between integrity and public trust at Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak. C. To examine the relationship between transparency and public trust at Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak. D. To examine the relationship between accountability and public trust at Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak. E. To examine the relationship between responsiveness and public trust at Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak. And F is to determine the most influential predictors of good governance practices on public trust at Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak.
I will explain in the part of conceptual framework.
This framework indicates the relationship between good governance practices, namely transparency, accountability, integrity, and responsiveness towards the public trust. A conceptual framework of the study is a model to conceptualize the variables that are recognized to be important to the problem. The variables are commonly distinguished as independent variables and dependent variables to test the relationship between the IVs and the DVs and to test the hypothesis of the study. Beshi and Kaur 2019 argue that responsiveness followed by the other variables such as transparency, accountability were highly influential towards the public trust in the local government. The researcher listed 3 good governance practices such as responsiveness, transparency and accountability. The result shows that they are highly significant towards public trust, while Said Alam and Khalid 2016 studied that integrity is significant on good governance practices in the public sector. The study by Said Alam conducted at the Federal Ministry, and the questionnaire were distributed to the head of department in the Federal Ministry, while the Beshi and Kaur 2019 the study were conducted at the questionnaire were distributed to the public among the Bahar City administration.
Next, I will explain in the part of methodology. First, research design. In this study, the researcher used the quantitative method through a cross-section study. Second is sample size. Referring to the official website of Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh, the total number of people that receive the service of Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh is about 300,000 people in a year. Therefore, the sample size in this study is 384 respondents. Third is the unit of analysis. In this study, the unit of analysis refers to the individual public who receive the service and have service experience when dealing with Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh. Fourth is sampling technique. The researcher used the purpose sampling technique, study focusing on the individual public who have received the service and experience when dealing with Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak. Next methodology is data measurement. The researcher using 3 measurements, which are measure of tendency using standard deviation and mean, Pearson correlation analysis and multiple regression analysis. Measure of tendency be used to achieve the first objective, which are to examine the relationship between public trust and good governance practices in Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh. Therefore, the researcher provide 10 questions and be measured using 5-point Likert scale. Next is Pearson correlation analysis. Pearson correlation analysis being used to achieve the second until 5th objective, which are to examine the relationship between integrity that provide 11 questions, transparency that provide 9 questions, accountability that provide 10 questions, responsiveness that provide 11 questions on public trust. It's been measured using the 5-point Likert scale. Lastly, multiple regression analysis. Multiple regression analysis that being used to achieve the last objective, which are to examine the most influential predictor of good governance practices on public trust at Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak. Last methodology is data analysis. The researcher using 2 data analysis for this study, which are descriptive statistics and inferential. There are 2 types of inferential that being used by the researcher, which are Pearson correlation and multiple regression. The descriptive statistic analysis being used in part B to which to measure the public trust. Pearson correlation being used to measure the good governance practices, which are integrity, transparency, accountability, and responsiveness. Last but not least, multiple regression. Multiple regression being used to determine the predictor of good governance practices toward public trust. I will explain the main finding of this study. For the first objective is to identify the level of public trust on good governance practices at Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh Perak. For this part, the researcher measured the mean value with the strength of the relationship among public trust and good governance practices. If the mean value is 1.00 until 2.00 is a weak relationship. Moderately weak is 2.01 until 3.00. Moderately height is 3.01 until 4.00 and 4.01 until 5.00 is the height strength of relationship. Therefore, 9 out of 10 questions for this part show a moderately high relationship between public trust and good governance practices, which is between 3.61 until 3.97. Meanwhile, only one question show a high strength relationship, which is 4.12, with the question of follow the rule and regulation imposed by Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh, Perak. The second until fifth objective in this study, the researcher measure the strength of relationship using R value. R value below 0.2 is a very weak correlation. 0.2 until 0.4 is a weak correlation. Moderate correlation is 0.4 until 0.7. 0.7 until 0.9 is a high correlation. And lastly, 0.9 and above is a very high correlation. Therefore, the second objective is to examine the relationship between integrity and public trust. As the result, there is a significant relationship between integrity and public trust because the result of p-value is not more than 0.05, which is 0.00. Moreover, high correlation relationship between integrity and public trust being shown, which the result of R value is 0.871. The third objective is to examine the relationship between transparency and public trust. There is a significant relationship between transparency and public trust because the result of p-value is not more than 0.05, which is 0.0. And it shows a high correlation relationship between transparency and public trust, with the result of R value 0.894. The fourth objective is to examine the relationship between accountability and public trust. Therefore, there is a significant relationship between accountability and public trust because the result of p-value is not more than 0.05, which is 0.00. And it shows a high correlation relationship between accountability and public trust, which the result of R value is 0.886. The next objective is to examine the relationship between responsiveness and public trust. Therefore, there is a significant relationship between responsiveness and public trust because the result of p-value is not more than 0.05, which is 0.00. And it shows high correlation relationship between responsiveness and public trust, which the result of R value is 0.876. The last objective in this study is to determine the most influential predictor of good governance practices on public trust at Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh, Perak. The table shows that 91.3% was the relationship between good governance practices and public trust is a high relationship. Meanwhile, the value of R squared reported at 0.833 indicate that the variance of public trust can be explained by the independent variable, which is at 83.3%. Therefore, the most significant predictor of good governance practices on public trust is transparency with the highest beta value of 0.408. Meanwhile, integrity is the most lowest influential predictor of good governance practices toward public trust with the beta value is 0.012, followed by the accountability with the beta value is 0.268 and the responsiveness with the beta value is 0.252.
The limitation of the study firstly is the response rate, poor response rate. Poor response by the individual public who receive services at the Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh. There are many reasons that affected the low response rate in this survey, such as selecting the wrong participant, wrong timing, lack of closure, no incentive and others. Those reasons affected the response rate in this study. Next, the limitation of the study is sample size. The sample size should be 384 respondents. However, the researcher obtained 214 respondents for the study. Lack of cooperation by the respondents influenced the sample size of the study.
Limited of prior research studies on the topic, especially in the context of Malaysia public sector. Most of the past study are focused on the good governance practices in the private sector in Malaysia because private sector have complete database in order to make continuous improvement in the organisation. Public servant and local government. This research can give some insight towards public servant and local government on good governance practices and their relation to the public trust in local government. This research provides some guideline to the authorities in order for them to create rules and regulation to be implemented in the local government. In addition, transparency, accountability, integrity and responsiveness are significant to enhance public confidence or public trust towards the local government. By implementing these practices, it can help to increase public trust in local government and to ensure the public servant is doing his or her duties and responsibilities in good manner. Next, future research. This research can be one of the reference for the future research of study on good governance practices and their relation to the public trust in local government. There are a lot of researchers who are doing research in this field, but it is in a different scope or context. Many researchers are measuring similar good governance practices, but this research emphasized on the 4 good governance practices. This research can be a turning point for the organization in order to make changes, especially for a local government to make a reference for a better future. Next is law enforcement. Law enforcement can be highlighted as vital for the research study. There is no specific action related to the public servant other than code of ethics and code of conduct. Public servants who break the rules and regulation will be subjected to the law enforcement. This shows that law enforcement is significant in the local government. As the result shows in the study, transparency are the most influential indicators of the good governance practices, which are 12%. It can be described that Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh are successfully delivered their services to the public, as the finding shows that transparency are significant to the level of public trust. Enhancing law enforcement will reduce the corruption rate in the country, and this reflects the public servant objective, which is serve the public needs and solve the problem. Next is client charter. Strengthen the client charter are vital in order to make continuous improvement for an organization, especially local government, because they have close relationship to the public. Ghazali 2018 stated that if the implementation of client charter are effective, the customer satisfaction also will be increases. Customer satisfaction are referring to the level of public trust. Hence, it can be described that when the local government really serve the public needs and practice the good governance practices, namely transparency, accountability and responsiveness, it will increase the level of public trust. The result in the study indicate that good governance practices, namely transparency, accountability, integrity and responsiveness, are significant to the level of public trust, which are 0.894, 0.886, 0.871 and 0.0876 respectively. This shows that the public satisfied with the services provided by the Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh. Strengthen the client charter are significant to make sure the public servant really apply good governance practices during performing his or her duties. The complaint received could be as a feedback mechanism, and it can be act of as a form of feedback in order for the local government to make improvement.
In conclusion, good governance practices and their relation towards the public trust are significant to be implemented in the local government, such as Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh. This research will make sure that the public servant, either the federal government, state government or local government, are exercising their power within their duties and responsibilities. This research is important to increase the public trust because the objective of the public servant is to serve the public needs, whether it is in the rural areas, semi-urban or urban areas. The public servant at the local government should meet the objective, and they must have a close relationship between public and the public servant. In order to prove that the public servant has a close relationship with the public, the implementations of good governance practices are vital. It's crucial indicators for all levels of government in order to measure to what extent what the government is exercising in good governance practices. On the other hand, good governance practices are the performance appraisal made by the public towards the local government. The services provided by the Majlis Bandaraya Ipoh shows that the public trust in the appropriate organisation. Good governance practices are vital to shaping the local government's performance.
That's all from us. Thank